today of two different types of sketchnoters, the gardener and the architect. The gardener will turn over a plot in the front garden, picks out their favorite sunflower seeds, scatters them about, waters and watches the flowers blossom and reach toward the sun. They embrace serendipity and don't try to control the outcome. They enjoy watching the whole scene unfold. They'll come back daily to water in hopes that they will bloom. They feel free, excited about the possibilities, and curious about how tall they're going to grow, what shade of yellow they will turn out. You're living in the moment, and you get lost for hours while you hum to yourself and dance around the garden. You appreciate the cold, wet soil in your hands and feel the sunshine on your face. I'm still not able to turn on my video, by the way. Cool. So the architect, however, would look at this problem quite a bit differently. They would measure the garden space to determine the perfect amount of wood to build a flower bed, choose the right location for maximum sunlight, calculate optimum spacing and exactly how many sunflowers are going to fit, set up an irrigation system to give them the exact amount of water daily, and then finally measure the flowers as they grow to ensure that they're reaching the expected height. Hi, everyone. You believe that you can avoid costly mistakes by planning everything out ahead of time. You feel in control of the process and the outcomes. You feel safe and smart. This appeals to our analytical side, right? You want to know all the details, you want to have all the skills, you can plan out the sketch note and make it perfect from the outset. I don't know, that sounds a little bit waterfall-y to me. And this approach can also get you into trouble when you let fear, self-doubt, and self-criticism get in the way of creation. It stops you from reaching your true potential because you stay firmly inside your comfort zone. You feel safe in the knowledge that I can't draw. You've already determined that long ago. You just aren't good at it and there's no need to try. But that safety comes at a price. That price is your creative soul that is yearning to come out and play. So my theory, and what this entire talk is based around today, is that learning the basics of sketch notes and drawing will help you feel more comfortable to move from your safe comfort zone into the improvisation zone. So the analogy I'm using today, the gardener and the architect, comes from a talk I saw by George R.R. Martin last year. He was in London speaking in a converted church, and he was talking about how the gardeners would plant seeds and see where things go and just follow the path, while architects try and plan out the story completely ahead of time and might do deep, in-depth character sketches and things like that. Can you guess which one he is? I definitely think he's a gardener because he keeps exploring new ideas, and that's why we haven't seen the 6th book yet. Now, there's definitely value in both approaches, of course. So you don't have to be one or the other. On a given day, you can be both. You can be that in the same hour, even the same minute. But you are your best self when you're bringing your whole self to the page instead of just the architect. So let's be honest for a second. Sucking really sucks. There's no doubt about it. The hardest part is that no one likes to not be good at something. But the first step to getting good is actually trying. Making mistakes and trying new stuff is all part of the process. If you're not doing this, then you're not growing, you're not getting better. Part of why it feels hard to sit down and create something is that it's a vulnerable act. It's an expression of you coming out on the page. It opens you up to the possibility of rejection, which can be a really scary thing. But it also opens you up to a world of possibilities. It might not always feel great at the time, especially if I have a really loud inner critic like I do. But when you look back at the risks you took and the stuff that you created, you can see your evolution and be proud of what you've accomplished. So if you think back to the first job of your tech career or whichever career, when you first started, you really didn't know that much. You weren't great at it. You learned from those around you and the experiences you went through. You made a lot of mistakes. Hopefully you learned from them and you grew. You tried different things. You continued to grow and learn. This is not that different. So we've talked about sketch notes, but what is a sketch note really? Well, there's no official definition. It's a bit amorphous, but I would call it a more visual note-taking method. So anytime that you're deviating from a straight handwriting on a page, adding arrows in that example, you could add larger words for different titles and things like that. There's no official definition. There's no rules. There's no governing bodies or ways that you're able to use it in your life and ways that you can't. So with this Frida sketch, for example, this one was a character sketch I was doing about someone for a comic that I haven't written, but I was exploring the concept. The one that's showing now is part of my prep for this particular talk. So I use it in a lot of different ways. And a broad majority of my sketch notes are mostly big words for emphasis or titles and give you a structure. And then I do some small drawings as well to kind of spice it up a bit. I use it for everything. I use it pen and paper like you're seeing there. The one with Frida was on my iPad where I can get fancy and have a load of different types of brushes. I use them for my daily work notes, which look a bit more like this. I use them for brainstorming talks, brainstorming everything really, and processing my feelings, travel journals, packing lists, you name it, I use it. So like I mentioned, it's kind of become a way of life for me. I think in sketch notes, sometimes I dream in them. It wasn't always this way though. I started off at Write Speak Code about 5 years ago. In fact, Chuki Chan is a speaker later today, and I both started on the same day. I saw her sketchnoting, I thought it looked really fun, so I went up to ask her about it. I was a bit scared, but I did it anyway. I made some bad sketch notes that day, took some risks, and then shared it on Twitter. I was so sure that there would be some jerk immediately telling me how terrible I was at drawing, which happens a lot if you're posting about technical topics or other stuff. But instead, I got lots of positive comments, and they've kept coming in, even on stuff that I thought was really bad. It's these types of comments in this supportive community that if you join it, you will see how supportive it really is. I've never gotten a unhappy comment from someone. Like, I can't think of a single time when someone was like, nope, that sucks, stop doing that. But sketchnoting started off as something I did at conferences, but pretty quickly made the jump to my daily life. It appeared first in my work journal. So just a bit of background, ever since my first tech job, I've been keeping really detailed log of what I do, the value I create, my feelings, my other work thoughts. It really helps me to keep things in perspective and articulate how I am adding value to the company. That spiraled into wanting to draw a bit better. So then I went out and bought a bunch of books. I bought a lot of notebooks and pens. I still have a problem with that, and warning, it really can become a full-blown addiction. But it's better than some of the other ones out there, obviously. But I started using it for my personal journal, travel sketch notes, brainstorming. Like I mentioned before, I use it all the time. But there's a few reasons why it became so ubiquitous in my life. First, it's plain fun. I just really enjoy it. I can get my mind off of stressful or worrisome thoughts when I'm feeling overwhelmed. Or if I'm stuck in a procrastination loop, I use sketchnoting as a hook to get me started on the task at hand. So when I'm writing talks, for example, I actually have a lot of anxiety around speaking. But if I start with a sketch note, then that really helps me to get excited about the topic and doing the research. And then I'll go look at a bunch of different YouTube videos or whatever and do sketches from that. And then that builds up into, oh, hey, now I have a talk. And Nishya is going to talk later today about how she uses that in her speaking process as well. So third, it's also a great way to build your personal brand and making new connections in the community. People are drawn to visual things in sketch notes, even the ones that are bad. There's no real bad ones, but sometimes you might call it bad. They're more interesting than just staring at a wall of text. And I've met many of the speakers at this conference and many of you in the audience through my sharing of sketch notes on Twitter. It's one of the most important vehicles that has helped me up my visibility in the tech community. I sketch note most, if not all days, both in my work and personal. It helps me focus in meetings at work, especially if it's ones where I might get a little bored and drift off. I've also noticed a marked difference in my ability to remember things when I do a sketch note instead of just writing regular notes. In the personal realm, I do a mix of bullet journaling and sketchnoting. It's great for everything from personal retro to planning out my Animal Crossing islands. And then one thing you may have noticed from the flipboard of all these different sketch notes is that there's a few similarities. They do tend to feel like they're created by the same person. While my drawing and style has evolved over time, you can still recognize my hand at work in all of these sketches. All right, a bit of housekeeping before we dive too much deeper. This session is designed to be interactive so that you can draw along with me. If you don't already have it, you'll need a piece of paper and a pen for this session. And I must emphasize a pen. You really don't want your perfectionist getting involved. Just draw something, commit, and move on. If you make a mistake, you can draw over top of it. You can make it into a heart, or you can make it into a variety of other things like an arrow. Just know that the more variables you add, the more complicated it'll become. So I often keep a scratch pad nearby as well, so I can jot down ideas. And if I'm at a conference, I'll take a phone snap, but today you can use screenshots if you missed something or you wanted to take a picture of it. But that said, I'm going to be sharing both my book recommendations and these slides afterwards, so don't feel like you're missing anything if you missed a particular screen. So for those that are new to sketchnoting, my job today is to convince you to step just a little bit outside of your comfort zone and into the realm of deliberate practice. I sincerely hope that today, even if only today, you let yourself be a beginner and a sponge for new information. Don't judge yourself too harshly. Trust me, no one else is judging you like that. And if I manage to convince you to share your sketches at the end of this session, you'll see how positively the community responds. If you're already an experienced sketchnoter, there should be plenty for you here as well. I'll cover my process and how to build a creative practice. Either way, I'd love to see your sketches after the session. Please share it on Twitter with the hashtag, and I've got it in the case that Denise was mentioning earlier. Seriously though, if you haven't got paper, go get the paper. Cool, so a lot of people are terrified of drawing. I was no different. I didn't draw when I was growing up. I didn't really try until my mid-20s. I put a lot of pressure on myself to make things look realistic, and I hated everything that came out. If you're going through similar feelings, let's start breaking down those walls together. So now that you have your paper and pen, I want you to draw these 6 things on your page: a square, a circle, a triangle, a line, a dot, and a word in your best handwriting. These are the 5 basic components of drawing. If you're able to draw these, you can represent a whole host of things in this world. Consider your laptop that you're probably looking at for a second. There's 2 connected rectangles that define the overall shape. You have an inner square for the screen, a square for the trackpad, and a bunch of little squares for the keys. When you start looking at objects like this, you start to see smaller shapes that make it up, and it's going to be a lot easier to represent them. Now, most people think of drawing as the act of making marks on the page, but the real secret to drawing is learning how to see the world around you and how to slip into the creative and intuitive space in your brain instead of staying firmly in the analytical mode, which basically tells you a lot how not great at it you are. The 6th element, your handwriting, is going to be the workhorse of any sketch note. If you think your handwriting is terrible, the best advice I can give you here is just to slow it down a bit. My handwriting is absolute chicken scratch when I write quickly, but when I slow down for sketchnoting, it looks pretty good. So we'll go deeper into fonts and drawing soon, but keep in mind that you're going for simple shapes and recognizable items, not artistic renderings and not realistic drawings. We're trying to express ideas instead of construct masterpieces. Or as Mike Rode, who wrote the Sketchnote Handbook, says, ideas, not art. So now we're going to give ourselves permission to play and to create, if only for this hour. Let yourself be open to trying something new, put yourself out there and grow new skills. So what we're going to do is draw our creative license. So start by drawing a rectangle that's wider than it is tall. Draw a square in it on the left, up to if you want to fill in the person now or later. Write the words creative license in bold next to the square, and then under it, your name is allowed to be creative today. Add a signature line and sign it however you please. We'll be learning about people a little bit later, so again, please don't worry too much about the person in the box. Now, if you're still feeling a bit of resistance to this exercise or are new to sketchnoting, I want to reassure you that this is the perfect opportunity to give it a go. Literally nobody is watching you. Well, maybe your cat, but no one can judge you. If you were doing this at a conference, people around you would be curious and stare, which might bring you out of flow. No such danger here. Now, to go back to the people at a conference, they would still be really excited and curious. They wouldn't be like, oh, what are you doing? That's terrible. They would be just asking you a lot of questions, which is cool, but it's also a little difficult sometimes. Great. Now that you've given yourself permission to play, let's learn a little bit more. So this section was designed to speak to your inner architect, or the analytical side of our brains. We're going to start by building a sketchnoting toolbox and give you the tools that you can upgrade over time. The aim is to take fear out of creation by giving you a clear starting place or a blueprint to work from. The exercises are designed to bring you just enough outside of your comfort zone, but still be fun. So we're not going to dive too deeply into the world of information architecture today, but keep in mind that the end goal of a sketchnote is to convey information to your reader. And that reader might be yourself, or it might be other people randomly on Twitter. You want to make it clear at a glance what the most important bits are. You really want to draw the reader's eye with a visual hierarchy that's easy to follow. This will help them orient themselves on the page. CP. In this example, if you just scan the page, you see that Kotlin coroutines are lightweight threads that you can suspend and that you should think about exception management. Probably also notice the conference name logo that we're talking about Android. That said, don't get too hung up on choosing the perfect layout ahead of time. It's better to start and let it evolve than to get stuck in analysis paralysis. So I'm speaking from experience here. This was the thing that really tripped me up for quite a bit in the beginning. I was worried that I'd get to the end of the talk and not have enough space for something important, which is probably something you're worried about right now. Now, this has definitely happened to me, but over time you start to get a sense for how much or how little to fill up a page as you're going through the talk. You'll just have to experiment and refine over time. So with this sketch note, I took it at a live conference, and that's true of a lot of my sketch notes, but I also started at the top left and then filled in information across and down as we went through the talk. It's not really scientific. You can go down, you can go over, you can go in the past if you want. But basically, the idea is you want to, if you have some space and you think the topic's going to be big, you might want to put it over to the right. So the suspend topic was a little bit longer than the why topic, for example. So if I had put it underneath why, it might have gone off the page. So I instead wrapped it around to the right of it. So now that you have a rough idea of like where you're going to put things, my best advice on what you're actually going to capture from a talk is look for the things that really resonate with you or new bits of information that you thought were cool. There's no need to capture everything you say. Like when you did notes in college or in high school, and if you wrote down everything, it was very hard to scan it later and figure out what's important for a test, right? This is the same thing where you want to make sure you have just the most relevant information to you that's going to help you going forward. When we're talking about drawings on the page, I listen for evocative or descriptive language. Sometimes the speaker will give you something literally or visually in their slides, and at other times visuals will pop into your head. In the talk you're watching right now, I use the analogy and assign them icons to make them more memorable. The gardener is the bonsai tree and the architect is a castle. But maybe you thought shovel when you first heard gardener, and maybe you thought compass when you heard architect, and that's cool too. And finally, it's good to leave a little bit of space for unexpected bits of information. If you end up with a large open space at the end, you can always fill it with a drawing. In this particular example, the reason why the Twitter handles are so big is I thought there might be another section, but there wasn't. And at the bottom right, the little Android head helps me flesh out that section a bit more, but I thought there was going to be more things I'd write down. So now we're going to talk about design principles. So you can use the acronym either CARP for the fish or crap, but it stands for contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity. This concept is from the Non-Designer's Design book by Robin Williams. And these 4 fundamental principles of design can be used to make any composition more visually compelling. So let's consider this sketch note in the context of crap design. I'm going to give you about a minute to stare at it and see if you can find some of the examples of where I'm using alignment, where I'm using contrast, where I'm using repetition, and where I'm using proximity. Okay, I lied. I gave you about 30 seconds for that. So first, let's talk about contrast. So contrast means exaggerating the difference or adding a spotlight in your design. That might be something in colors and font sizes, drawing, highlighting, or other elements. Here, I use big words for the title and for the sections. I use smaller writing for detail in each section. I use a cursive font for an emotional title and a blue box to contrast with the orangey red. I also added some drawings to create visual interest. So with repetition, that helps you build cohesion or unity in the design. You use it to amplify a message or a theme. Here I'm using the same font for most of the titles and the detail. I used images for most of the sections, and I used mostly the same color throughout. Now, not everything needs to be exactly the same for it to count as repetition. For example, in the intro slide, I used a really large castle and bonsai tree, but it appears small on most of the slides. That's still amplifying the same message, however. For alignment, here you want to think about text editors. Same principles apply. You want to create a visual connection between elements and give order and harmony to the design. Generally, you want to choose one alignment and kind of stick with it, but if you break it, just do it intentionally, because if your composition starts to have things all over the page, it starts to feel quite a bit more floppy. So in this sketch note, I'm mostly aligning to the left edge along and the middle of the sections in each row, so across. I also align stuff on the right down the center instead of a right alignment. So proximity is the last one we're going to talk about, and that's used to show a relationship. Things that are related should be grouped together, and items that are not similar should be apart. So you can add banners and containers to make it explicit that things are related, like I did with the blue box over here. Yeah. Cool. So now we're going to move from theory and we're going to move more into drawing stuff. So let's talk about fonts. Like I mentioned before, your baseline font is going to be your handwriting. You already have that. You've been using it your entire life. If you slow down, it might look a little bit better. You can also use that same handwriting and make it bold by going back over what you just wrote. You can also mix in either cursive or joined up writing to create contrast. And then finally, you can reach for more whimsical fonts like graffiti or steal them from the computer, like Denise mentioned last weekend in our workshop. So your exercise on this page is to write the word love in 3 different fonts. This can be your handwriting, some of the ones I have here, or you can quickly search for a font on the internet that you like. Remember, do not let the perfectionist take over here. All right, I hope that was fun, not too harsh of an introduction into the world of drawing. So now we're going to move on to our next slide. So now we're going to start drawing bigger things. So if you remember the drawing components that we used earlier, which are squares, circles, triangles, lines, and dots, let's now use them to represent everyday objects. Don't forget, we are going for recognizable, not artwork. So the pictures I have here are fairly simple line drawings. So your exercise now is going to be copy an image or 2 from what I've drawn here, or find something in your room and draw it now using the shape. This should take you between 30 seconds to a minute to draw something, maybe shorter if you're doing it really snappy. So I'm going to give you time on the clock again, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it before we move on. Cool. So when we practice drawing something, we're building up a visual vocabulary. We start adding meaning to what we're drawing. For example, with the coffee cup, I often use that to mean I had a coffee date with someone, whether or not we drank coffee, especially when it's in my work notebook. I use the emoji in my one-on-one meetings, the titles in Google Calendar, but sometimes it just means coffee. The more that you build up your visual vocabulary, the easier it will be for you to call images to mind in the moment. So if I started talking about building a house, for example, you might immediately reach to the square with the triangle on top, and that might become your default representation of house. So this is one of my favorite ways to draw. So Kawaii is Japanese for cute, and who doesn't love drawing adorable animals or adding faces to everything? So your drawing exercise on this screen is going to be either drawing the happy beat, adding a face on something that you drew earlier, or having a lot of fun with it and creating something new. Remember, you can put a face on almost any doodle. Kawaii faces usually have the mouth and eyes in line instead of the proper places on the head. Eyes are really exaggerated to make it even more cute, and you can add stars or bubbles to make the pupils cuter. I got my start from Pick Candle's YouTube video, so that's PIC Candle. And she really breaks down that process and really well and gives you an approachable place to start. Another source of inspiration here is emoji. So I'm going to give you another minute. Draw something cute, please, on your paper. So if you really enjoy Kawaii as much as I do, there's tons of books out there that can help you build up your Kawaii library. Okay, let's move on to our next section then. So something that I use quite a bit is icons. I've mentioned your visual vocabulary, but basically, because I use it every day all the time, pretty much, I have a few icons that are my go-tos that I use in my day-to-day life. I draw them so often that they just flow out like the letters do. These are from my private collection. I use them all the time. So when I draw the calendar icon, I usually write down what I'm doing for the day because my day is mostly meetings now. And a lot of the work output I produce are emails. So I have the Gmail calendar, I'm sorry, the Gmail envelope. I also use the light bulb for any time that I have ideas that pop up during the day. I'll use the cloud either for a thinking bubble or maybe to talk about a backend, Android and iOS. You could draw an apple or a little robot. And then I've mentioned my coffee cup before. But basically, when you're building your own collection, think about the tasks that you do or the software that you use on the day-to-day. Sometimes they have really cute mascots that you can steal, like GitHub, but they will at least have an icon for their website or their app. So if you're an Android developer, you can sketch the Kotlin logo or the Android Studio logo or draw a debug robot. So our exercise here is going to be drawing 1 to 2 icons from your own work if you haven't already done it. And I'll put another minute on the clock. All right, that was about a minute. So I hope you found something fun to draw. So now we're going to go into even scarier territory, and I'm going to give you more time on this next section. Drawing people is probably the thing that scares people the most, but with a few strokes, you really can make decent representations of people. Think of the avatar designers for Mii's for Nintendo or Animal Crossing as shown here. They use a few basic shapes for the head. The eyes, nose, and mouth are super simplified, yet at the end, you have something that is recognizably you. I tend to think of face drawing as an equation. You start with different bits like the eyes, nose, and mouth, and then you add them together, and eventually you have a person. For my Animal Crossing avatars above, you can see that they use a curved line with just a flourish at the end for eyelashes, a small little oval for the nose, and half circle for the mouth. It's really simple. The hands are circles. They don't even have fingers. The most realistic things, they do really go out for the clothing and the glasses, and it does look really realistic, which is interesting contrast. But yeah, so the faces are a place where you can express motion and emotion, and you can do emotion with very little things. So the one on the right has just cute little love flowers, and then the one on the left is a thinking face. So it's really helpful to be able to express the different things that people are feeling. So our first exercise for drawing is going to be drawing someone from this list here, or someone else that is real or imagined. You might want to start with one of these first and then deviate from that. But I suggest starting with the basic structure like the head. A circle is a great one that you can use, but you can also make it an egg shape, a square, alien, or any other fun shape you can think of. It gives you a canvas for emotional expression. So now to express those emotions, you're going to start by putting the eyes halfway down the head. So it doesn't quite look it when you look at a person, but that's where it should be when you're making those drawings. And if you're going to add ears, they are also at the same level as your eyes. So then you're going to put the eyebrows just a little bit over the eyes, add a nose, and then below that, the mouth. I also like to use hats and hair to cheat sometimes. In these particular examples, I'm not really hiding anything. Well, I guess with the guy thinking about the croissants down at the bottom. But yeah, so when we're talking about emotions, we can express anger through eyebrows pointed inward, sadness with a downturned mouth, surprise with a big O for the mouth. The examples on the left, I based off of artists. So Frida drew pretty much this little icon to represent herself. Picasso created cubism, so you can play with that style to create fun faces. And then finally, Dali sported several crazy mustache styles, so different mustache styles. So these are the thin, curly ones that he often liked to use. So I made a quick cheat sheet here. So this is when I was talking about thinking about it as an equation. So basically you can mix and match, use different pieces here that appeal to you. You can try them out for a while. If you end up hating them, then you throw them away. But you can see with the eyes, you can go as simple as a dot. Same with the nose. It can just be a circle for the mouth. And you can draw a beret with a half circle with a tiny little thing coming off of it. So there's a lot of ways that you can get creative and expressive with this. So if you think about eyes, for example, you can have a lot of fun there. Because if you draw like a star for the eyes, that might show that someone's starstruck, for example. Or if you do hearts to the eyes, like the emoji, then somebody's in love. Cool, so I'm going to give you 2 minutes here to draw people. Going to go back to the previous slide just so you can have those as examples. Okay, hopefully you let yourself try and create a few faces here. If only a tiny little one which just stops and smiles. Cool. So now that we've done some random people with some easier to draw little bits, let's try and draw ourselves for a moment. So if you didn't already add avatar to your creative license earlier, this is the perfect time to try it now. If you already did that self, that's great. Let's draw someone else. So think about the features that define you or the person that you're trying to draw. So for me, I have an eyebrow ring over my right eye. My hair is long now. I often wear square glasses. What about you? Is your head round or more square? Do you have a pointy or rounded nose? Do you often smirk, or are you usually smiling? In my drawings, I tend to use what I call the head and shoulders method. So you draw a circle for the head, 2 small sticks for the neck, and then a half circle for the shoulders and body. You can add the suggestion of clothes by adding a triangle or half moon for the neckline. Once I have the structure, then I start filling in the facial features. You can cheat a little bit by hiding hair behind a hat, ears behind hair, or hiding hands behind the back like I have in 2 of the drawings here. Finally, you'll add in details like necklaces, clothes, and headphones on the head if you really want to at the end. The main point to remember here is that you should focus on the things that stand out to you about that person. The one on the left is somewhat me because it has the eyebrow ring, but I don't have that haircut. The guy with the beard is my partner. It's such a distinctive beard that people come up to us in the park to remark on it. And the other 2 people I just made up. One book that I found really influential for me for this was Modern Cartooning by Christopher Hart. He influenced my style and helped me see that I could create people fairly straightforwardly with some of the things like the faces and the mouths I showed you earlier. So I'm going to give you another 2 minutes to draw yourself. And if you finish that, then draw somebody else. Draw as many people as you can in the next few minutes. All right, I hope you were able to draw something. I'm actually going to skip questions for now, but I'll have time for questions at the end. So in the gardener section, we're going to talk about building out your creative practice. I can't teach you how to become a gardener necessarily with a list of tips, but it does end up happening when you continue to follow the creative journey. First, we need to collectively get over our fear of the label creative. I'm not sure why we shy away from it. Perhaps we feel pompous, like we're saying we're an artist on the level of Van Gogh or Frida. Or maybe we feel like frauds because we're just beginners. We covered this earlier, but you're never going to be great from the moment you first try something. And you already are a creative person. All humans are creative. Or maybe this morning you arranged your food on the plate in the shape of a smile to add just a little bit of joy. Maybe you arranged some flowers for the living room or came up with business ideas for funding your side project. All of these are creative expressions. We do it in a million small ways every day. So what creativity is at its core is really just a mindset, a way of thinking. It boils down to using your current knowledge and applying it in a new or interesting way. You don't have to create an original or create a brand new, unique piece of art for it to be considered creative. You can creatively just solve a problem. Now, creativity is the one thing that really sets us apart from machines. Learning to open yourself up to it, it's a skill that you can actually build. It's both joyful and it's also practical because it's one of the top skills that employers are looking for. And one thing that I don't think we give enough credit to is tech is actually way more creative than we think about it being. We think about it as engineering and analytical only, but that's not true. We take problems and constraints and come up with novel ways to solve those problems every day. We use what we've already learned and our own experiences to come up with a new solution to a problem we haven't seen before. So one of the reasons why I have made creativity a pretty strong focus of my life is that it does tend to bring me more joy, more fun, more gratitude. I'm not exactly sure why or how, but I know that I see all the small stuff that I used to take for granted. And it tends to, not just be, as I started out with drawing, but I'm creative when I'm at work. I'm creative when I'm coming up with talk ideas. I'm just creative now in a lot of different places. It just kind of starts pouring out of you if you start to embrace it. It really makes it easier as well to access flow, that desired state that's so hard to get into. And then finally, you're going to find yourself in a warm community. So you should definitely open yourself up to this and continue to create. But just like anything else, if you do want to get better at it, you're going to need to practice. Now, the thing you need to keep in mind, though, is you want your practice to be deliberate. So today, if you've never drawn before, we went through some starting ways for you to start to get into drawing. So you might want to practice that for a while, maybe a few weeks. But at some point, you're going to get pretty good at that. If you continue to practice just the thing that you've been practicing, you're not going to learn anything new. So a deliberate practice would be, okay, well, I know that I can draw some houses with the components I have now. How about I go pick up a book with a topic, maybe Kawaii or something like that, and then try to draw from there. So that's in the deliberate practice zone. That's taking you slightly further than where you are right now. And one thing you really need to keep in mind, and I'm not always great at this, is you don't need to be in the mood to create. You just really need to show up and start. So your biggest enemy is going to be your inner critic. Mine is a lying meanie. She tries to keep me safe all the time by discouraging me from taking risks. She wants me to stay inside my comfort zone so I never get hurt, which is super sweet, but it's really not going to help me become who I want to be. So you need to fight your perfectionism, if you have that, your self-criticism, and your self-doubt. Now, my main weapon against them is making them so mind-numbingly bored that they just leave you alone. So you can get to the business of creation. There's a book I love, and I've read it like 3 times, called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. In it, she suggests that you try a few tricks to access the right side of the brain. If you're drawing, for example, you can turn the image upside down because your analytical side will be like, what are you doing? This makes no sense at all. That doesn't look like a hand. What are you doing? And then eventually it shuts up and lets you do what you wanted to do. Another trick is focusing on the negative spaces instead of drawing the thing. So if you're looking at a plant that has a lot of overlapping leaves, you might draw the little triangles that are beneath the leaves. And if you draw that, then at the end, you might have a plant instead of trying to draw the leaves. Because your analytical side will be like, oh yeah, leaf, easy, just over on the side. They want shortcuts all the time. but the creative side wants to play and grow and evolve. And I mentioned this before, but most people think of drawing as the act of making marks on the page. But the real secret is learning how to see the world around you and how to quickly slip into that creative, intuitive space in your brain instead of staying on your analytical side. Cool, so I'm going to give you some tools and some tips to help you get a little bit more playful with your sketch notes, since you have this baseline set of tools. First, a great way to get around your inner critic is to have a starting element that makes your page no longer empty. So it takes away that fear of a blank page. It gives you a starting point and helps you to build momentum. I stole this idea from Inky Art School, which is an online accompaniment to the book, How to Draw Inky Wonderlands by Joanna Basford. She starts with a small basic flower, and it's just the one where you do little loops into the center. And then she sees where it goes from there. She uses that and then draws some other petals around it and maybe some leaves and now another flower. And it gives her a starting place that feels familiar and safe. So she takes that, so it takes away the fear and helps her just to get started and start building momentum. So if you're thinking about when you build software, for example, it's the same sort of thing. You don't just wave your hand and there's now software free of bugs right in front of you. It's a slow, deliberate, consistent trudge towards the finish line. In the realm of fonts, you can shift letters around on the axis to have more fun. Or what I'm calling the Portlandia Approach, you can put a bird on it. You can choose something like flowers or birds that you really like and start adding them to the margins or attach to words or attach to boxes. I tend to fill in the drawings I have and then so when I'm drawing those things, I draw them in as an outline and then fill it in, because then it allows me to build up other areas if I made a mistake. So that's one thing I like to do a lot. Now, you might make mistakes, and that's okay. One way to get around that is to take that mistake and turn it into an arrow or turn it into another drawing. That can be really helpful to hide those. And then finally, I use things like brackets and thought bubbles to group and separate items. So if, for example, I'm doing a sketch note and something gets far too close to the other thing, I might draw a little cloud around it to separate the two items. So let's briefly talk about style. So this is one thing that I struggled with for quite some time, really until about this year or so. I spent so long trying to find my style, thought it was something that other people had and something that eluded me. Now, I'm pretty decent at copying other people's stuff and representing some of real life, but I was seeking my elusive style. So I did what most of us do. I went to the internet. It wasn't until I started watching tons of YouTube videos about it where I started to understand and accept that my style was just me. And that's a really important point. Your style is simply everything that you like and everything that you do. It's not a mystical quality or one that you're born with. You evolve into it. It changes and evolves with you. The ones that know their style well are the ones who have accepted the way that they are and what they're attracted to and are comfortable with that knowledge. If you too are striving to find your style right now, take a breath and realize that we're already here. We are already enough, and that we have valuable things to say and valuable things to contribute to this world. Let's see more from you instead of more of somebody else's stuff. Now, one thing to note is when you start looking for inspiration out there, make sure that you're not comparing yourself to, for example, your week 1 or day 1 to my year 5. So the things you're seeing in here is things I've been practicing for 5 years. That's not going to help you feel any better about your ability to create. Just stay in your lane and be excited about the new things that you're building instead of judging yourself against somebody else's piece of art. You can absolutely be inspired, and I think you should definitely seek out other people's stuff, but don't use that as a way to put down your own growth and attempts at creativity. So we'll just briefly talk about creative constraints, but there's already some implied in this session. We only have one pen, we have a sheet of paper that's only so big, and we only have so much time together today. So this limits the choices that you're going to make when you're doing your sketch note, because you want to get it done by the end of the talk and then ship it to Twitter, please. So if you're able to watch a video, for example, afterwards and get a very detailed drawing, you can do that as well. But often when I'm doing sketch notes, I'm trying to get a sketch note shipped by the end so I can go talk to people in the hallway track. I'm actually pretty bad at setting creative constraints on myself. It takes me a long time to pack for a day out, especially if it's a longer trip, because I might leave the right materials behind and miss my chance to capture the moment perfectly. So an excellent example of this was my iPad, 12-inch iPad Pro. I loved it, sketched with it at home all the time, but I never took it with me anywhere. After that was stolen, I ended up getting a 10-inch instead. And I'm so glad that I did because it was so portable, I carry it with me all the time. And it also gets me out of decision paralysis because I have one device with infinite pens and brushes in it. But photographers often say the best camera is the one that you have with you. So even if you manage to find the perfect materials, if you never carry them with you, then you're not going to use them very often. So finally, I've mentioned it a few times, but it's a really warm community out there. And I really encourage you to share your stuff out loud. Find your people, grow together. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm going to take questions in a minute, but I hope you enjoyed the session and learned a thing or two. So the high level points that we went over is hopefully with a few building blocks, you're going to feel comfortable exploring the world of sketchnoting. Creativity and drawing, for that matter, are both skills that you can learn. So your homework and takeaway from this session is going to be share your sketch from today and trust in the kindness of the universe. The world needs your voice and your creations. I'm sure we could all benefit from a little bit more joy and play in our lives. Now, if you still feel wildly uncomfortable, I would urge you to continue to practice today by creating a few more sketch notes as you watch the rest of the conference. If you really hate your sketch notes in the end, you can always redraw them or throw them away. No one will ever know. The cost of failure is very low. And your stretch goal is going to be buy a notebook and a pen that you love and try drawing something small. Can be as small as a coffee cup or stuff in this talk as well, every day for a week.